until I deal with the others. But I certainly want to be able to detect if things get worse. How do I make sure that what is okay and stable doesn't fall into the getting worse category? Now, of course, in getting worse, we always love corrective action. Don't just stand there, do something. Turn that problem around. Well, you got to understand what the problem is and where did it come from. Now, I find a lot of people get stable and stuck, but they try to use corrective action and review, well, what's the most recent symptom? Well, a problem there is best illustrated by something Dr. Akoff said. He said corrective action will not work on a stable system. Now, I know my friends at Hanford have a lot of fun with everything goes into corrective action management because the government says so, and they have lots of stuff in there that are really stable. And the problem is I need a different way of doing business. Dr. Akoff told the story of, I can prove this to you. When we're done with this, go turn on your television set. What's the chance that the show on the TV will be something you want to watch? Probably not very likely. So you have at home your remote control. So nothing's happening. Okay, so you change channels. What's the likelihood the next show's any better? Well, that was corrective action management. You didn't like the first show, you flip channels. That's no good, flip the next channel, flip to the next channel. You are executing corrective actions, you're trying to do something different, but you've done nothing to create a better show. And of course, when you do find out what are your sources of trouble, you can work on getting better and you'll be able to detect that, and you want to reinforce and reward and apply lessons from getting better. So, on slide 18, Phil will like this here, that we are getting into the idea of how do I tell if I'm stable and predictable or I'm not stable? Well, there's this word I hear a lot of people use called trending. I want to know if I have a trend. Now, if you look trend up in the dictionary, it means something is changing. Now, generally, people like me with operations research degrees and stats degrees and math degrees end up doing this trending, and we try to help management with, well, this is changing or this is stable. Now, when something's stable, if it's acceptable or not, that's usually a management function. I can help you as a statistician with, well, what's the benchmarks? But as your mother said, if everybody else is walking off the cliff, do you have to also? So benchmarking and copying has its limitations. I'm going to move on to slide 19. One of those injuries per month charts. I'm sure many of you have a chart like this on the wall, probably outside your conference room. And yes, all the numbers of injuries per month are different. Some months are better than others. And I am sure that somebody could come in and say, oh, look at that fine improvement we had in February 2005. No, it's because we put some new posters up. But those posters worked great in February, but then in March, the workers got lazy and we had 12 injuries, and here's they've gotten better than our peak in March, and I know what we're doing, and we are a finely managed process. Really? But I'm sure you've sat through many a presentation like that at a monthly safety meeting, or even worse, a financial management meeting. Of course, the next thing to do is we'll do what the VA did. We got to set a target. Okay, what does that do to change the system? In fact, talking about targets, many people say, Steve, what about the JFK? We will get to the moon by the end of the decade. Now, there's actually some writers out there, science writers, who now are convinced, and I think I'm joining that group, that the goal to get to the moon by the end of the decade destroyed the U.S. space program. I mean, we're at the state of affairs right now where I got to pay the Russians to put a U.S. citizen in space. How do we get to that point? When I was growing up in the 60s, the thought in the space race that we would someday pay the Russians to put our people into space is fantastic. But the problem is, if you look to history, we took shortcuts to put the man on the moon. We did not build a space station like Wernher von Braun wanted to launch missions to Mars and other things. We went for that lunar orbit around the moon instead of the Earth. And we focused everything on getting to the moon, and once we got to the moon, what did the public say? Okay, great, we did that, done that. Let's stop spending money on space. So now we're at the state of affairs after that target of we got to pay the Russians to put an American in space. Of course, there are then 12-month moving averages. I wonder if the Russians use those. But they give you a completely different interpretation of the data. Unfortunately, moving averages just move along with the data. They don't have any alarm feature to say, well, when is it up or down? And even better is the red, yellow, green, or where I'm working, we even have blue and purple as colors. 5 colors are better than 3 colors, obviously. And let's see, well, and I only show you the most recent data. Now, all these charts portray the same data, but with completely different answers as to what's going on. I mean, right now we're yellow. It's plain to see we're yellow. Very simple. But where are we? And more importantly, where are we heading? None of these charts answers the question even hardly of where are we, let alone where are we heading. Now, there's a nice tool that Dr. Schuhart, a guy in 1930, developed with Bell telephones called the control chart. This is statistical process control. You will notice there's just the data. This is exactly the same data as portrayed in the previous 4 charts, just as plotted as dots. And I've put an average line on them, a 3 standard deviation upper control limit, and a 3 standard deviation lower control limit. Now, I can give you many hours of lecturing on how to make one of these charts. It's really not that hard. And there's some links that I'll show at the end as to how to make this chart. But the idea is I just take these numbers, I lay them out, and I think hopefully even without knowing what is a standard deviation, you notice all the data is between the red and green lines. It seems to be equally likely either side of the average. And what you get is that this is stable. And in fact, these were computer-generated random numbers that were used for all 4 charts. This is the only methodology that actually told you the truth, which is it's just random noise. I'm bouncing around an average, getting different numbers every month. And so there you see on slide 24, those are the definitions of what's being plotted. Again, the data are just the data. And I have an average of the data. And again, amazingly, here's your stats lecture for the day. Half the data will end up being above average and half below the average. Or if you really know the right answer, it's median, but it usually works out that half the data is above average and half's below. But we all get excited about the average for some reason. By the way, for the people in San Diego, the average temperature in South Carolina is exactly the same as the average temperature in San Diego. However, I'm sitting here at 42 degrees today. I know people north of me are colder, but I'm sure Phil in San Diego is a lot warmer, correct? He stays right around that average. His level of variation is very small. His standard deviation is small. The standard deviation of temperatures in South Carolina is much higher. All right, moving on to slide 25. Again, the quote, the job of management is prediction. So I can move forward these control limits and the average line to say, this is my prediction of future performance. If nothing changes, if I do nothing to change it and nothing externally changes it, then this data will just keep following the same process ad infinitum. And it's now stable and predictable, and I can decide whatever it is I'm measuring. Is there too many, too little, just right? I can make a decision as to, shall I just stay with this data? Now, that being stable, the problem is a lot of people will read into the data from month to month. As the data changes from month to month, they will react to those ups and downs. Another consultant out there tells a story of a vice president in a shoe plant that showed the number of defective shoes made every month. It was on a chart on his wall, and he was very proud of it and showed the consultant and says, I know exactly what's going on when I look at this chart. And the consultant asked him, so what is going on, sir? I guess nobody asked him that question because he sat back, pondered a little bit, and said, well, some days are better than others. Well, that's not a very good way to manage, I hope you'll see. So if we can tell when are the data stable and predictable, also Dr. Deming used the word common cause there, versus when do I have a trend? Did I have special cause? I've seen many places miss trends, and by the time they are detectable on, say, a moving average or a bar chart, they are so far gone, so much damage has been done, that the recovery costs more than if they had just detected the trend in the first place. So we can use that chart I showed you to detect trends and separate out the signal from the noise and make sure that we're not chasing false alarms. Now, this is one set of rules I use, and there is a link to Energy Facility Contractor Operators Group. It is, since it's done for the government, there's no copyright on the materials. In fact, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators somewhat plagiarized this material and rewrote it as a copyrighted document. I do know a lot of companies use this list. I will tell you that there are variations on these rules, especially the number of points in a row above below average. Dr. Wheeler, who's a very fine author, you should read his books on SPC if you run across Dr. Don Wheeler, but he says 8 points in a row are the same side of the average as a trend. If you use Minitab software, it says 9. I happen to use 7, which is what Dr. Atchison Duncan used, and is the most conservative. I tend to want to be able to detect problems in the world I'm in, which is nuclear power. So we go a little more conservative with a 7. I've never seen anybody do 6. I wouldn't recommend that. In fact, for the people who go, well, I want to be more safe and react sooner, well, if you believe that, go home, take apart your smoke alarm, and tweak it so that any little bit of dust in the air will set it off. So you are sure that you'll detect the fire if it goes off. Now, what's really going to happen? You're going to have lots of false alarms every day, and you're going to yank the batteries out of that smoke detector and throw it out. So we always have to have a balance between detecting a fire and not having a ton of false alarms, because at either extreme, it's not useful. So I almost am balancing the idea of how do I detect this thing without having a lot of false alarms. And that gets into what they call alpha and beta type of error for the people who've suffered through Stats 101 courses. All right, visual definition here. By the way, this is why the tool statistical process control works better than moving averages. This is a little visual takeaway. I have a criteria, a single point outside of the 3 standard deviation control limits. Only 1 point, but it has to be at 3 standard deviations. Another rule, 2 points at 2 standard deviations, 4 out of 5 at 1 standard deviation. All a very little shift, but it has to be 7 points around the same side of the average. See the relationship between the number of points and the distance you are from the average. So this is something that a straight moving average, you know, the people say, well, we're on a 3-month moving average, we're on a 12-month moving average, stand on your head. It doesn't get you anywhere. This, at least with statistical process control, which is I've taught high school students to do this. In Japan, a high school educated person is expected to do these charts in a plant. Works very well without getting into some of perhaps the black belt type of analysis of variance and logistic regression. Now, some of the higher level statistical tools, you may end up with a statistical problem that needs it, but usually you can get by with SPC. All right, so we've gone through this tool, which hopefully, if you haven't heard it before, take a look at SPC. There's a lot out there. If you Google SPC, you'll find a lot of stuff I wrote, or a lot of stuff Dr. Deming wrote. It's been around for 80 years. It works. Okay, so if I have my definition of these things, so I have my definition of a trend, yes or no, is there a trend? If I have a trend, yes or no, is it in the right direction? Now, be careful of that. For example, if I'm tracking injuries is something almost everybody tracks, so I use that as an example. But if you suddenly had a decreasing trend in injuries, you say, this is great, I have less injuries, this is wonderful, throw a pizza party. But then you find out that a certain vice president said the next person who was injured is fired. Well, now you got a trend. Yes, you detected a change, and something did change, but not for the right reason. So that's why it is important to investigate, even in so-called improving trends, to make sure you know why the trend occurred. Why was that rule tripped? What actually changed in the system to make that special cause, or was the special cause? So again, there's how I detect this. So I've given you at least a model for how do you tell if you're stable and predictable, that you have what they call common cause variation, and if you have something that's changed, special cause, and at least understanding, okay, what changed? And that's a good risk management tool, because at least we can say if you've always been doing this and it's stable and you're not in jail and you're still making some money, then okay, you've got an acceptable level of risk with whatever this metric is. if you throw a trend, you ought to understand what's its impact on your risk. So I may not be able to absolutely measure risk, but I can at least tell you when your risk is relatively changing and where to go look. All right, so here we go, management. If you've suffered through the statistical discussion in the last 10 slides, you're now like, okay, now what do I do with this? So if I have a trend, I need to figure out what changed. What's the cause that occurred to special cause? Something has changed. We need to find it. We need to understand it. We need to correct for it if it's a problem. We need to reinforce it if it's in the right direction. Positive lessons learned. How can I apply this someplace else? But again, the TV remote changer, no amount of corrective action management of trying to look backwards at the most recent event will fix a stable, broken process. Now, I do suggest if you have a stable process, there is lots of tools out there, systems analysis, there's human performance for the Department of Energy folks, there's all sorts of process improvement things to understand your process as is, even the DMAIC system the black belts have, and say, okay, how do I redesign this system to get better results? And again, you can always ask yourself the question, is doing nothing an acceptable risk? All right, this is slide 33. This is a real-life example from Hanford from many years ago. I won't say which facility, but we had some interesting trends. The first aid case rate there really increased back in the middle of 2003, kind of stabilized out in 2004, 2005. They got a handle on things, and the first aid case rate went down, and it wasn't because somebody said the next person who has a first aid case is fired, but that led to the question, well, what did happen? Well, I can use something called a Pareto chart to help me out. This is on slide 34. What I did was I plotted by different causes of injuries, again, using injury data because hopefully everybody's familiar with it. You know, I don't want to have injuries. And I look at my different causes of injuries. I noticed, for example, that, looks like overexertion really didn't change much from before the shift to after, but a lot of the other ones changed. I circled things for you on slide 35 to say, okay, we made some good improvements on struck against objects, contact rubber braid, falls, trips and slips, awkward positions. But if I was going to work on something to get the next level of change, I might want to look at this overexertion, lift, push, pull, and body motion. And for those people who are identify with safety out there, those are ergonomic causes. The body motion and overexertion actually fit together and are part of a common system that can be worked on. All right. Many people have scorecards. I'm a big believer in balanced scorecard, but how is it displayed and what does it tell you? Well, I'm looking at some National Management Association data again in preparation for this. I said, well, what's some data from the actual Management Association we can use? Well, there were awards given out to chapters. And this table I was given goes from year 1995 to 2014. Nice long run of data here. And how many chapters got outstandings, superiors and excellence, and then there are some publication awards go out. Now, I don't know how important or not important these numbers are, but for the numbers guy, hey, I got numbers, I got something to play with. So, we can ask these questions. Are the data correct? Now, sometimes when I do analysis, people say that can't be, and as we dig into it, it wasn't, because there were some problems in the data, but at least because we dug, we found the problems. Does this data reflect that original mission and vision that's on the website for National Management Association? Is this data a good thing or a bad thing? Is that kind of a Winnie the Pooh question, I think? A good thing or a bad thing? And should I take action? That's the last question, of course, is what any manager should ask, is some sort of action needed, and if so, where should I look? Well, I made a first stab at making one of these control charts. Now, it was very obvious as I looked at total awards given out to chapters that maybe I didn't need a highfalutin control chart, but it's pretty obvious that there's a long-term decreasing trend going on. Now, this was using something called an X individuals moving range chart. So I have 8 above average, I have 7 below average, I have a couple points below the lower control limit, I have a point above the upper control limit. I got all sorts of stuff that tells me this data has been going down with time. Now, in order to try to understand it better, I usually try to break this into different stable time intervals, and this is my stab at it, that it looks like it came down. I don't know what the data before 1995 is, but then it steadied out, and it came down and steadied out, and now it's on a pretty steady down ramp through 2014. Okay, I don't know. I wonder how many people are aware this was going on. But we look at that and say, well, let's peel this back a little bit. So now, I'm not a big fan of people doing lots of bars side by side, but what I did after making the control chart and determining that the process was not stable, I said, well, let me look at the 3 stable time intervals. I'm going to go back to slide 40 and notice there was 3 time intervals to look at. This last one isn't stable, but I wanted to compare to it. So as I look at slide 41, I noticed that the outstanding awards came down a little bit with the 3 years. Superiors came down more, and excellence came down even more. So it's interesting, there's a difference between the type of award and the change. Might mean something. So if I was with the NMA and said, oh, I'm sitting in Dayton, Ohio, what does this mean? I might ask the following questions. Well, why are the number of awards going down? Now, perhaps there's less chapters. If there's less chapters, there's less awards to give to chapters. Have the award standards changed in the past 20 years? Or indeed, is this data telling me the chapters are getting worse? Now, as I look at the excellent, superior, and outstanding changes, why are there used to be a lot more of one than the other. Now there's an equal number of excellent, superiors, and outstandings. What does that mean? And the publication award activity hasn't changed. So this is the questions you'd ask. Now, this is the limit of what me as a number cruncher sitting in South Carolina can do. This is where management comes in and says, well, does this mean anything? Of course, if your answer is this doesn't mean anything at all, then why do you give out these awards? All right, so the infamous phrase, proof is left to the student. So are these data correct? What does this mean for the whole association? What does this mean for the mission and vision? Is the decreasing number of awards a good thing or a bad thing? Do I need more data, like how many chapters are there? And now if I was in the American Society for Quality, I was a section chair, a chapter chair. Many times I got data from headquarters at ASQ going, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. So the question is, well, what should be done with this? And I'll leave that. Proof is left to the student. All right. We've been going at a pretty fast pace here, but I hope that I've asked some questions here. Now, as we kind of reflect a little bit here, I do want to leave you in this slide with some links. The Energy Facility Contractors Operating Group has a collection of my writings. They are all document released by the U.S. government. There is no copyright. You're welcome to steal away. I just ask if you use them, hey, let me know how it goes. Just like I try to let Phil know what I'm doing since he mentored me, I'd love to know what you're doing with that. There's also an exercise which is much better than talking head on a computer screen. Dr. Deming came up with this wonderful experiment called the red bead experiment. And there's a video of a session I did at Hanford many years ago. And what happens is this is a convincer to why do I have to understand my control chart, understand when I'm stable, what's wrong with taking the wrong action on a stable process. Well, he has workers come up in a role-playing exercise and make beads. And red beads are bad and white beads are good, and he does all sorts of things, and so do I, if you look at the video I did, trying to emulate Dr. Deming and say, okay, well, you made too many red beads, you're fired. Or, oh, you had the least number of red beads, here's a bonus for you, and all sorts of things that go on. It gets rather humorous, and I found, actually, I think my friends at Hanford will agree with this. I probably argued with folks for 7 years at Hanford, from 1993 to 2000, about we ought to do SPC. 1 year of doing red bead experiments was the convincer. Especially, I'm amazed at the folks who say, well, the rank and file employee will never understand this. Well, they caught on to this a heck of a lot faster than some other highly paid people did, shall we say. Just saying that perspective is there. Now, goal setting. I did write a few things on goal setting. Again, I hope that you are taking to heart the experience right now with the VA. Certainly as a veteran, I am very interested in what the VA has done and how they have misused their data, and worse, misused the veterans. But follow what happened when they set their goals, and very well-meaning people set numerical targets, and it completely destroyed the VA and has destroyed many careers. So what do we do instead of saying, well, there must be only 5 days from when you request an appointment to getting an appointment? There is much, let's understand the data. What is the system in place able to do or not do? Notice right now they're realizing the system could not handle the number of patients they had. They've got to get more doctors, an amazing concept. Dr. Deming, who most of this comes from, there is a organization out there manned by his daughters and grandchildren, the Deming Institute, and they're still espousing many things, and I'm still learning many things from Dr. Deming. Dr. Russ Akoff, another good guy out there with a ton of writings. And if you want to contact me, I'd be happy to discuss anything with you. I just love making charts. If you've got a pile of data, you want a control chart, I'll show you what a control chart looks like. There's my work phone number and my email. Now, this has been good timing here. Hopefully you've had a good time listening to this. Hopefully I've been entertaining. But the idea here is hopefully I have planted some seeds in your head about how do I use my data. I've got lots of data. There's some very simple and effective ways to look at your data, understand what the data is telling you. Are you stable where you want to be? Are you getting worse? Are you stable where you don't want to be? Are you getting better? If you can answer those 4 questions, you can be extremely successful. Good analysis will lead to good questions and better actions and success. Poor analysis, self-fulfilling prophecies, will cause confusion and frustration. You'll follow the road of the VA. So instead of following the road of the VA, let's build a better future, which is a phrase Dr. Akoff used. What I will do at this point is stop.